It's September, guys, and I am so excited it's middle grade magic. I am already halfway through Thornwood, and I am loving, loving, loving it. It is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty with the sister who is the main character, and it's like sisters ever after. It's focusing on sister relationships rather than the romance or other things, and I'm just really, really loving it so far. It's delightful, it's funny, it's a mystery, it's fantasy, it's sisters, it has friendships, and it's looking at class division and bullying, and I'm just absolutely loving it, and I cannot wait to read more middle grade books. I finished Thornwood and really, really liked it. I really enjoyed the story, the fantasy, the characters, the sisters, the reveals. I had some suspicions, and yet I was really surprised by some of them and gladly loving the end and the twists and the turns. And then I have been sobbing. I sobbed like 5 times because it was so good. I read Maizy Chen's Last Chance, which is a play on words on her family's Chinese restaurant in Last Chance, Minnesota. In the 1840s, Sunny Chan moved to the United States in San Francisco, worked in kitchens, and then eventually ended up in Minnesota. And he ended up working at a restaurant there. He helped Paper Sons and how he allowed people to skirt around immigration. We look at a lot at anti-Asian hate and the way that this has seen since the 1840s into the Exclusion Acts, into World War II when there was lots of anti-Japanese sentiment, and how different things corresponded with the ways that they're treated now in 2020, 2021. It is so good, and it looks at a lot at family, about immigration, about connection, about grief, all of these things. I really connect to these characters and the way that we suspect people to be good and the way that we suspect people to be bad and how we can be wronged. I really enjoy the story. I really enjoyed the characters. There's a lot of little characters. She doesn't like, other than her grandfather, she doesn't have like a huge connection. Like the primary relationship is between her and her father, who is currently has a terminal illness and is probably not going to get better. And they are playing poker, they're playing cards, he's telling her stories, and then she's also interacting with lots of other people. And I really, really loved it. I really recommend it. It fits into so many of the prompts, whether it's, for me, it is a protagonist who is of different ethnicity from me. It is a book that deals with some heavy topics. It is a book from a genre I don't normally read. Yeah, it covers a lot of different genres and a lot of our different prompts, and I will definitely be recommending the heck out of it because I loved it so much. I don't tend to pick up middle grade contemporaries very often, but I often really, really love them, and this one is definitely going to be a favorite. I'm going to be babysitting 2 young girls, so do I have braids and a shirt about Little Women? I absolutely do. You have to start these girls young. So it's a little bit past the readathon, but I decided to extend my middle grade magic for the rest of September. So I just finished Bitter. It was really, really beautiful and lovely and nuanced. Maizy does such an incredible job of making diverse characters come to life with their feelings, like the emotion, and the writing is just so beautiful. And then they talk about in the afterword about how like their health had been continued to decline to the point where like they needed other people to type because they couldn't hold a pen or type on a keyboard. And as someone who has a disability, that is incredibly relatable, and I don't know, it just washed me with emotion. And this is a story that takes place during kind of a dystopian era. They mention several people, so it's like I'm not sure if we necessarily fully knew from Pet that this was like post our world, but that is definitely clear here. And it's interesting because Geraldine Brooks and other authors that are definitely well known but modern are referenced as like historical people and stuff, which is I really loved that vibe. And yeah, it's a world in which revolution is happening. The main character, Bitter, is a student at Eucalyptus. Her, as well as all her friends, are mostly kicked out or in foster care because they were queer or lost their parents and stuff. And she has the beautiful ability to draw and to summon monsters, but she doesn't necessarily want to use that or being involved in it. She deals with a lot of fear. She deals with a lot of fear and panic, and the idea of being on the front lines is terrifying to her and terrifying to everyone around her. And it's just her story of realizing where's her place in this revolution, where's her place in her friendships, and there's some moments of like letting down your walls, of expressing those things and repairing friendships that I just thought were incredibly beautiful. I believe that Jam and Pet is 12, and I would say that these characters are probably 16 or so by the age, and like it references, the other one had swearing as well, but this one references like lots of drug use and them like hooking up and stuff. Like none of them is explicit, so I think like a younger kid could read it, but it's definitely not as geared toward the like 10 to 12-year-old age. But I think it was a really good book, and yeah, it allows you to understand the complexities that you don't always have to be on the front lines to be a part of a revolution, that there's a difference between complacency and taking a step back. There's a beautiful quote about like, it's okay if your capacity isn't this, like work with inside your capacity. And there's just so many beautiful messages and just character work and relationships in this, and I really, really loved it. I feel like I've been reading a lot of picture books this month, which is delightful. I think picture books are great, and it's also a celebration of children's literature, even if not quite middle grade. I just finished the picture book, and it's a picture book with illustrations, but it is definitely much more educational than like there is multiple different ways in which picture books done, and this one is more just straight nonfiction facts with pictures, but the pictures are absolutely gorgeous and wonderful. Probably should have looked up how to say her name correctly, but her name is Wangari Maathai, and she was an environmentalist, and she was really into reforestation and into women's rights, and she was an activist and a politician in her life, and was just really well known. So I think I did some research on her last week, and she seems like she definitely had some controversial aspects as well, but also a lot of good things as well. So it is very interesting to read her story and a woman I had not heard about, and to learn more about her. So that was really cool and interesting, and I enjoyed that. And then I am starting We Are Displaced. This is collected by Malala Yousafzai. I'm not really sure if this is geared toward a younger audience or not. I feel as if it is, because so much of her work is dealing with education and conversations around girls and girlhood, and she was obviously, I think, 12 or 13. I know that Malala is exactly my age. She's born in 1997. So I believe that this is kind of geared toward middle grade people, but it's already dealing with her experience of being displaced and other women, and I'm really glad that the collection exists, and I'm really excited to read it all, and I'm listening to it on audiobook. And yeah, middle grade magic rules. I'm about halfway through Dreaming in Color, and it is really, really good. I'm really enjoying it. It's about an Indigenous girl in Toronto who is accepted to art school, and she's experiencing like the joys of creating Indigenous art, but also the cutbacks of people viewing her as a minority and thinking that she just got in for that reason. I also really love the family dynamic. So she is biracial, and she looks more Indigenous when her brother looks more white. He's very into dance, and he performs and dances at powwows, and that can often, and when he more easily passes for white and doesn't receive as much racism in the world, he also receives some kickback for not being native enough and not being Indigenous enough when actually engaging with their culture. And I love the fact that they're able to like correspond and tease each other and talk about these things while also being really great siblings. That's really lovely. I'm counting as middle grade because she's 14, and she feels very 14, which is nice because a lot of 14-year-olds feel like they're 22-year-olds. And yeah, she is very innocent, and she's, like, she's like, everyone knows what they want to do after high school. I just was focused on, going into grade 9 and stuff. And I feel like YA almost never includes 14-year-olds. And I think it's a really fabulous story. It definitely had moments of stiltedness kind of at the beginning, but it's definitely getting its flow and going really well. And I finished We Are Displaced, which was just wonderful. I think I like sobbed too many ugly tears throughout it. It began with Malala's story and ended with her story, but in between we had people that were refugees from North America and South America and Asia and Africa as well. One of my biggest pet peeves is people referring to like Guatemala and El Salvador and other countries that are in Latin America as South America and stuff like that, even though they're part of North America. North America has 26 countries in it, and I think it's just part of like westernizing, pretending like Canada, the US, and maybe Mexico are part of North America when it goes all the way up to Colombia. So like, anyways, Colombia is part of South America. Everything before Panama is North America. It's just like colonial crap. One of my favorite things was a corresponding story from sisters from Yemen who tell their story, and they eventually go to Egypt, and then they're separated. One of them ends up in the Netherlands, and one of them ends up in America. It's a really compassionate story about the ways in which they choose different things, and also deals with the harrowingness of what is promised and what is supplied on, and how some people cut off other people and stuff like that, and yet there's reasons why everyone makes decisions, and that all of this ever does is feed people who are already advantaged. All of these other people are just trying to survive, and I think it's a really necessary conversation when we talk about immigration, when we talk about refugees, when we talk about all of these things, and human rights, just basic human rights. It was published in 2018, where the Muslim ban and stuff like that was very, very in effect, but it's still just as relevant 4 years later. Hello, it is now October, and we finished middle grade magic, and it was really, really delightful. I had such a lovely, lovely time reading middle grade books, reading children's books. I read like a lot of picture books this month too, which is kind of in the spirit of this vlog. And yeah, it was really, really delightful. I finished We Are Displaced, I think last time we were talking, and then I read Rez Dogs, which I enjoyed. I think part of the reason I struggled with it is because Joseph, what is his last name? It starts with a B. Joseph Burchak actually narrated the book himself, and he is a 79-year-old man. And he was narrating like a 10-year-old girl's thing. So I feel like that was maybe not the best choice of like immersion, but I also like, he's the author, he can do what he wants. But yeah, it was a good book. I would definitely recommend it. Like, it looks at the early days of the virus, and she is separated from her family, and she's also looking at the ways in which people have separated and being forcibly separated and stuff. And there's a few scenes that just made me sob with the dogs. And I'm not like normally like an emotional pet person, but the ways in which it looks at how pets are individuals. This is something that I'm like, I feel almost controversial saying myself, because I am a person who I've always said like, I like animals and not like love them. And part of that is because I have a lot of strong thoughts about animals and domestication, especially zoos or aquariums and stuff like that. Like, I do not have very many kind thoughts about them. Like, I'm not gonna like yell at people who like participate in that, but I just, unless it's like an injury or like something where you're saving them, like, I don't know, I don't think that we should, you know, domesticize animals just for our entertainment. Like, they should have freedom. And I sometimes feel that way about dogs too. I think that like, you know, you can have a dog if you want, but like sometimes when I just like, you can have a dog, but like as someone, I grew up with dogs. I grew up with dogs, like country dogs. Like, I grew up in the country and my dogs were outside and they were happy. But like every time I'm in the city and I see like a big dog with a leash, I'm always like really brokenhearted. And like, it's not even like a judgment thing. Like, it just makes me sad. And I don't think I could own a dog. I don't know. I don't have strong feelings about animals in general, but I do feel very strongly about captivity in dogs, captivity in animals. Anyways, that's my weird social justice thing, which I don't think most people are like super concerned about, but I am very concerned about. So it talks about like dogs having their own things and allowing them to like have freedom, but also kind of the spiritual significance of that really touched me in really cool ways, and I really enjoyed it. And it deals with a lot of like, you know, acknowledging, she's talking about the ways in which femicide has happened, and, you know, keeping people like sterilization, forcibly sterilizing women and stuff like that. And her teacher being like, that didn't happen, and then googling and then googling it and finding out that it's true. And like, it has moments of learning and stuff like that, and I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. And then Dreamy in Color is also by an Indigenous author, and it is set in Toronto, which is why there should be a C in the color, but alas, we'll talk about it. But this is about a girl who is starting grade 9. So it is, I guess, kind of YA, but it definitely has that vibe of more younger, you know, finding herself and stuff like that, finding the ways in which she fits. And it is really powerful. Like, I cried a lot, and I think that it looked at family dynamics really well, like things. So pretty much, she is biracial. She is Irish. She Irish or Scottish? I'm both, so I believe she's Irish. She could be Scottish. Anyways, she's Cree and Scottish. And she takes back after her mother a lot. She looks very Indigenous, and her brother looks quite Irish. And like, we have her going to art school and being accepted into like a preppy art school and stuff, where she does a lot of Indigenous art and stuff like that, and receives bullying and being too Indigenous and things like that, or like, you're only here because of affirmative action, or just crap like that. Meanwhile, her brother, who is a few years older, he is very into traditional dancing. He wants to be part of that culture and stuff like that, but he does often receive some feedback because he looks white, and people are like, is this really his place? All of these things and questions, which I thought was really, really well done. And the discussion of how she wishes she looks more white, and he wishes they would look more Indigenous, and that connection and stuff like that. And I think that is like really relevant to Canada or many countries, the ways in which we've tried to remove Indigenous art and land and culture, and then people having to reclaim that and finding their roots and stuff like that. And I know several of my friends did not find out they were Indigenous until they were teenagers or like 19. Like, the fact that I have like 3 of my friends who like found out as an adult and were like, by the way, we didn't tell this because we've been like hiding from residential schools. And they're like, what? You didn't tell me? You know, reconnecting with a heritage in which you might not necessarily be identified on site with, I think is also really powerful. The ways in which like blood quotients and like all of those things have been used to try to eliminate, and also trying to like lessify and, assimilate into the culture. I think all of that is really problematic, and it talks about that very specifically here. And yeah, I think it's a really powerful book. And overall, I really, really enjoyed Middle Grade Magic. It was really delightful. I think Dreaming in Color and Maizy Chan's Last Chance were like my two like super, super standouts. Also Zoe Washington. Yeah. I think those were the like the three that I really enjoyed. Bitter was good as well. Like I enjoyed all of these books. Like I would recommend all of them, but those are like the three that I really, really enjoyed. And I hope that you join us next year, that you read more middle grade books, and yeah, I'll see you next time, where we affirm all kinds of books.